We're recording. All right, off we go. So here we are in April, springtime. I have an April picture. Things are just coming out. Let's get right into it. So just a review of these monthly meetings. Our initial focus, our ongoing focus continues to be EnviroDIY monitoring stations and everything that surrounds them. However, we obviously are doing a lot of other things such as broader stream monitoring, a lot of work with regard to these synoptic samplings or snapshots. Overall, lots of talk about freshwater ecology concepts, data, et cetera. Data to action, our local policy and practice work group is certainly working on this question and updates each month. They're actively working on documents, support documents. Tools and resources, certainly bringing wiki watershed tools and such into topics of conversation, and plenty of other topics on our radar. Today's agenda: normal introduction and Stroud updates, normal updates from the work group, and then we're going to have a presentation by Dr. Keith Fritchie, stream temperature monitoring and example applications in the Middle Delaware Basin. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for discussion too. Meeting is being recorded. Recordings are always available at this location. Wiki Watershed. If you just go to the Wiki Watershed page, you can click the tab at the top that says DRWI to get you to this page. These meetings are every third Thursday of the month, 2:30 to 3:30. The Zoom link is always the same. Keep that for your records if it makes it easier for you. Everyone's welcome. I'm sending out email reminders a week prior and morning of. If you'd like to put yourself or anyone else on this email list, for those that aren't on the list, feel free to be in touch and I'll put you on that list. Those attending these meetings are generally from within the Delaware Basin, either actively participating in the Delaware River Watershed Initiative or just broadly in the Delaware River Basin with many of the different watershed groups, schools, universities in this region. And we do have folks from outside the DRB from time to time attending. The Stroud Center is supporting this work via DRWI and Seesaw primarily. Delaware River Watershed Initiative is a William Penn Foundation project. Seesaw Consortium for Scientific Assistance to Watersheds is a PADEP product that allows the Stroud Center to provide support to watershed groups within Pennsylvania. Feel free to talk to Stroud about that if you would like assistance on any number of science topics. Stroud team on this community science work, me, Krista Reeves, Shannon Hicks. Plenty of master watershed stewards involved. Here's a few: Carol, Joe, and George. A number of others are very actively involved. Stroud Center DRWI leads: John Jackson, Matt Earhart, and Dave Arscott. As far as this EnviroDIY in the Delaware River Basin, the primary goal remains, from the Stroud perspective, remains to support watershed groups and those who manage the stations, the volunteers who work on the stations, to use the stations and the data for their own local watershed purposes. Secondarily, we're certainly supporting that with analysis of data, these meetings, developing a number of different tools to support folks in understanding and communicating the data. So updates. So again, just Stroud and community science support. Feel free to be in touch if you need assistance in any of these different realms: snapshots, overall monitoring, project design, methods, etc. Analyzing, interpreting data, just general education, or just overall questions, concerns, inquiries about any number of freshwater ecology topics. Feel free to be in touch. Also, if you have photos, stories that you'd like to share and for the Stroud Center to amplify, share on other social media platforms associated with the Stroud Center, feel free to do that via sending to Diane or me. Ian, would you like to provide a quick update on the local policy and practice work group?
Sure. We're keeping on working on the documents that we've been discussing for the past over a year at this point. We're working on the conductivity document currently. Things are going well. We meet the first Thursday of every month from 11 to 12:30. For these guidance documents that we're creating, we're trying to make it so it's easier for groups to learn how to engage with municipal leaders and the various different aspects of each of the main points of data that the sensors use. So we already have the temperature document, which is ready for use. We are working on some one-pagers currently for that. It is available online, hosted by the Stroud on the Managed by Watershed. If you're curious about these documents, this would be how you access it, by going to the tools, and then you'll be able to find the documents there. If you have any questions on trying to find them, feel free to email me at ian@njhighlandscoalition.org, or anyone else who is listed earlier in the presentation. We can help you find those documents. If you have any suggestions for any of the documents, feel free to send them our way as well. There was a Watershed Congress, which members of the work group attended and presented at in March on March 23rd, the recording of which will be available soon.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Ian. Any questions before we move on to the presentation from Keith?
Oh, just a question. You did present at the Stroud or the water research last couple Saturdays ago. What was your opinion of that?
At the Watershed Congress, you mean, Jim?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think it went well. I mean, our session was one of the better attended sessions, and we made some good connections. We got some good feedback. I don't know, anyone have any additional comments on that? Dave Manning, Carol, Joe, Tally? I don't know if Tally's on today or not, but any of you guys have anything to say about the Congress?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. It was positive. I thought the reception was good. The number of people good. We had a number of conversations afterward that indicated everyone got it.
Yeah,
What was that, Jim?
I was going to comment that I've heard a lot of it before, sort of preaching to the choir, but it's great networking opportunity I've found. In fact,
Yeah.
I met a gal who is she works for AD Marble and a project on the Turnpike, which is of great interest to us because they want to widen it through Great Marsh. So anyway, great
Right.
networking opportunities.
Good. I notice in the chat, Tally says the recordings are available. We do have the recording. We did receive the recording, but I hadn't been given the go-ahead to put it on the public site. That is to upload it to Manage My Watershed. Tally, do you have some feedback that we are able to do that at this point?
No, sorry. I literally just got the email that said recordings from the Congress available. So that's what I thought you meant. Sorry.
Well, no, I mean, if that was an email that I didn't get that yet, maybe it just hasn't come in. But if they sent out an email to attendees and the recordings are available now, then that presumably means that they're publicly available. So we'll be putting the recording of that session on the Congress up to the Manage My Watershed website as well. So that will be up there too. And it's an overall summary of the products that are being developed and will be developed.
Yeah, and I'll just share, we had a little survey afterwards for the session and, definitely got good feedback, and even some next steps for, what we could focus on. The group has been focusing a lot of getting people to really understand their data. I think there's still some work to do to kind of get people to still feel comfortable, sharing it and understanding when within a municipal process is the best way to get involved. So I think that's kind of the feedback that we got.
Yeah, definitely have to keep the long term in mind with this. We'll always be able to go deeper and refine more and more to make things more easily accessible, more able to communicate them to lay audiences. So great. Thanks, Dave and Tally, for that feedback. I will stop share right now and, oh wait, actually, sorry, let me share again and go to my next slide. Do it proper here. We've got Keith Fritchie today. He's the watershed planner at Vermont DEC, the Water Investment Division, stream temperature monitoring example applications in the Middle Delaware Basin. All right. Go ahead and take it away, Keith.
Thank you, David. So everybody's seeing a presentation?
Yep.
That's good. All right, so thank you everyone for having me today. I am Keith Ritchie. You might wonder why someone from Vermont is talking to you. But for several years, I was New Jersey Stroud restoration manager in the northwest part of the state. I'm also from Pike County, PA.
Hey, Keith.
Yep.
There's some muffling to your voice, I think. I'm not sure if you can adjust in some way, but I'm having trouble hearing because it's muffled.
So let me.
We may have to turn off the video.
I don't know if that's it or not.
Is this better for everyone or no?
Something to do with your microphone. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good, Keith. I don't know if it has to do with the video or not, but that does sound good.
Okay, just continue to flag if there are issues. Might just be my internet connection up here right now.
All right, will do.
Okay. So yeah, so I was, in my current role, I don't get to think and talk too much about stream temperature anymore in Vermont. So I'm really glad to be able to just brainstorm with y'all and discuss some of the stream temperature monitoring. And thinking through today's talk, I really want to stay, I think, at a higher level because I realize.
Keith, sorry, it's still going muffled. It was muffled there and then it got clearer. Did something happen?
No.
Is there movement or anything?
There's not. Let me just move closer to my router. See if that's any better.
It sounds like it's something with like something getting muffled or something. I don't know. Very soon. Okay.
Nice. I spend a lot of time on Teams every day, so.
That's good right there, whatever that is.
Okay, maybe this part of the house will be better for me.
Okay.
Sorry about this, everybody. Let me try to reshare here. All right, we'll be back to seeing a PowerPoint slide.
Yeah, that looks good and sounds good, Keith.
Okay, great. So I wanted to stay at a pretty high level today and touch on a variety of topics, really focused on why we might care about stream temperatures and therefore monitor stream temperatures, some very basic approaches to monitoring stream temps, and then just to kind of share out some examples, applications of how I've used monitoring data in New Jersey, really specifically for trout conservation planning, but we might think about other reasons why you all are interested in monitoring temperatures. So feel free to interrupt with questions, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end to discuss as well. So hopefully this is the only really big laundry list I share with you, but I'm trying to trying to think through why we might care about and monitor stream temperatures, I think there's a variety of reasons that all, I think do connect to one another. So I'm going to flip through a few slides that touch on these bullets, but I will also share out these slides with David so that you can kind of walk through this presentation yourself at some other point and hopefully maybe connect some of these dots. So I think first we know that temperature can vary quite substantially in space. So on the bottom of each slide, I'll often have a little more info document. That's just a link to maybe a published paper or a different resource that kind of provides a bigger perspective on what I'm talking about. But I often try to just focus on the Delaware Basin or New Jersey on the slides themselves. So in the images on the right, you see three different streams that I'm actually currently monitoring in the Flatbrook Watershed in Northwest New Jersey. And really, I think, a key question for me and why I monitor streams is to answer questions like, which of these is the warmest, which is the coldest, and why is there this variation in stream temperatures among these streams? So if we were interacting, I might try to ask and poll who thinks which stream is warmest, but I'll just let you know the stream in the top left is actually the warmest stream in this local watershed. The top right stream is actually the coldest. It's a big groundwater spring. And that main stem you see in the middle is actually somewhere in between the two, even though it has, the most volume by far of either of these streams. So there's, variation in stream temperatures that we can't always just predict, based on, local landscape features or just visually. So that's one reason why I monitor stream temperature. And so you can see on the right, these are streams that are part of this really complex network that we're monitoring in the Flatbrook in New Jersey. So the big Flatbrook is sort of that thicker blue line that starts in the top right and goes down to the bottom left. And each of these dots you see on the screen is actually a place where we're continuously monitoring temperature for this brook trout study we're doing right now. But really, I think the take-home message here is that in the main stem Flatbrook and then in all these tributaries coming into it, there's significant temperature variation. So each of these numbers you see next to the dots is the mean July temperature of each of these sites. And you can see they range from about 11 degrees C or maybe like 50, 52 degrees Fahrenheit, all the way up to 22.7, which I think is, maybe 73 degrees or so. If we actually had temperature monitors at those blue blobs, those are dam sites, we do have past temperature data to show that those go even above 80 degrees as an average July temperature. So in this small stream network, just a few miles, we see really huge variation, almost 30 degrees Fahrenheit from some, one stream to another. So there's really large variation in space, and that's not unique to the Flatbrook. That's true at multiple spatial scales and in multiple environments, including elsewhere in the DRB. So, why does this matter? If we monitor streams, we see they differ in space, who cares? And for me, it's, because we know that stream temperature can really control multiple aspects of biology. So by controlling biochemical reaction rates, we know that stream temperatures can, really influence the performance of aquatic organisms, whether they be plants or algae, or what I, study and am interested most in is these brook trout. So this here is sort of my trout thermometer. These numbers on the top of the thermometer are sort of pulled from the literature and just provide these benchmarks for us for how temperatures can influence, relevant biological metrics that we care about. So on the far left, you can see brook trout kind of grow best around 58 degrees Fahrenheit when they're exposed to those conditions over the long term. And on the far right, you can see, once you start getting above 80 degrees, 50% of the individuals exposed to these temperatures, often die. So there's, over this, 30 degree or so range or 20 degree range in temperatures, we can go from optimal growth to death. And if you think back about that slide I just showed you in terms of spatial variation in temperature, you can see we really encompass all of those different temperature ranges just within the small space. So it's really important for me to really connect the temperature variation in space to the biology. And you can see on the bottom here, we just had we monitored 44 wild trout streams in New Jersey in 2018. And we found that on average, their mean July temperatures were around 70 degrees. So kind of right in the middle of this thermometer. So New Jersey, just like most of Pennsylvania and, at least southern New York, definitely is sort of at this thermal edge of the brook trout range, where they really have both really good habitat, but also really bad habitat. And it's important to know which is where. On the far right, I'm just showing that, brook trout is obviously just one of many fish and one of many organisms we might care about. This resource kind of just shows where the brook trout, and circled in red, aligns against many other fish species who have, if not the same quantitative metrics, they have similar relationships to temperature in terms of their biological performance. So because we know that, temperatures can influence biota that we care about, temperatures also influence things like metal toxicity to stream organisms, or things like nutrient cycling. So if you don't care that much about biology, you might care about those other more kind of chemical water quality parameters that we often focus on. But because there is this link between temperature and biology, many states have some type of water quality standard for temperature. So this is just here pulling from New Jersey's surface water quality standards. I just circle in red, for our wild trout streams, you can see what just one of these temperature standards look like. And here it's sort of the average temperature can't exceed some value over the course of time. So this is another reason why we might monitor, is to really determine whether our streams are exceeding these water quality standards and might be classified as impaired or not. So I did link to the policy and practice work group's stream temperature data report, and I think in their appendix they actually provide all the state relevant water quality standards for temperature in the DRB. That's a great resource, as well as these other sort of policy level discussions they see below. So we also know that we have a pretty good sense of really what drives variation in temperature across our stream networks. So there's definitely natural drivers, things like groundwater that I showed earlier, and that making that spring nice and cold. But there's also many ways that humans impact, stream temperatures and induce thermal stress on our local streams. This is kind of pulling from our Vermont surface water management strategy, but the same sorts of factors are influencing stream temperatures all across the DRB and, the world, essentially. And so because we know sort of what these impacts on stream temperatures are, we also can use stream temperature data to start planning protection and restoration activities to sort of, kind of protect or restore the thermal habitat that we care about for biota or chemistry or whatever reason you really focus on. So on the top, you can see ways that we might sort of directly improve stream temperatures. We can remove dams, which we know have really large impacts, local impacts on stream temps. For fish, we can reconnect kind of cold upstream habitat to warmer downstream habitats by doing things like upgrading culvert sizes. Or on smaller streams, we can also plant buffers. We know that at least small streams, that shade can really influence stream temperatures. And so monitoring helps kind of prioritize which of these kind of protection restoration opportunities should be implemented where on the landscape. On the bottom, you can also see ways that we can just either protect or improve places where there already is really good cold water without necessarily trying to restore those conditions. So I guess the last thing we have to mention now about why we might care about stream temperature and why we might want to monitor it is because we also unfortunately know that temperatures are likely to be increasing through time. So this is a kind of complicated figure, but if you just imagine that each of these lines is an individual stream, these streams are actually New Jersey's wild brook trout fisheries. So these are places where New Jersey Fish and Wildlife are telling folks to go out and go fishing for wild brook trout. And so what we've done through both collecting monitoring data at all of these sites, but also combining that with some models, we've actually predicted backwards through time what the average mean July temperatures of these sites have been through the years, going about all the way back to about 1980. And so you can see it's just in general for each of these lines, there's an increase in temperature through time. So temperature is on the y-axis on the left. You can see that mean July temp increasing through time. What we've also done on the right here is just related that back to some aspect of biology. And here it's just the probability that brook trout are going to be able to persist in that stream. And so, down on the bottom axis, 99 or 100% means it's guaranteed basically that brook trout can survive there over the long term. As you go up that axis on the right, there's lower and lower chance that brook trout are going to survive. So this is just one way for us to think about how, in New Jersey at least, we're increasing our stream temperatures, and that's decreasing some of the things that we care about and our stakeholders might care about. For Trout Unlimited, that was brook trout populations. So just another reason to maybe monitor is to sort of collect some of this more long-term data to sort of flavor our kind of strategies of protecting and restoring habitats with the understanding that the climate is changing as well. So finding those most resilient streams for protection and restoration might really be key in the face of a changing climate. So hopefully that was a high level reason why we might monitor temperatures, and that might lead to some discussion later. But a lot of different reasons of why monitoring temperatures might be important. So I just want to touch really quickly next on some of the common approaches to actually going out and collecting those data, which I think all of you are probably very familiar with. So we can collect stream temperature data in multiple ways, ranging very simple on the far left. I just call this a grab sample. We're just using a thermometer, sticking in a stream, recording one value on one date and time, and calling it good. Next, you can see a continuous monitor that's deployed. So there's a sensor inside the white PVC housing that's collecting temperature at some time interval, but it's just in one space and time. It's just in one point in space. So this is, I think, somewhat synonymous with the mayfly stations that many of you are operating, although this is, a different type of that equipment. And the two examples on the right show there are more and more complex ways of kind of characterizing stream temperatures. So there are both infrared camera methods on the bottom right. There's also fiber optic cable methods and sort of that top right, where you can collect data continuously in both time as well as space. So these are just really interesting techniques, but honestly, I've never deployed these. I don't think they're necessarily relevant to most watershed groups who might be doing monitoring. So I'm really just going to focus on the two types of data on the left, which are this continuous data and these grab samples. But to learn more about these other techniques, I would suggest checking out this paper on the bottom of the page. So I suspect you all know kind of what continuous monitoring data and grab sampling data look like and their pros and cons, but I still just want to walk through it pretty quickly with you all. So this plot here shows, the results of continuous monitoring data from just one site where we might be doing that monitoring. So each of the gray points is, a single point in time where that sensor is collecting a single temperature reading. And I think what's really most useful about continuous data like this at a single site is that we can then summarize those single point in time readings at various intervals. So in red, what we've done is just summarize 24 of those hourly readings into a daily mean. And that blue line, we've further summarized those daily mean readings into what's called a 7-day moving average. And I think it's really important that we're able to summarize our monitoring data into these different time average intervals, because these are really, the metrics that often relate back to the biology that we care about. So, for example, those brook trout I was talking about earlier, and their, the probability of occupying a stream. As well as linking back to our policies, so our surface water quality standards. They're often time average metrics that we want to compare our data to, rather than just single point in time readings. So I think that's the large benefit of collecting continuous temperature data if we're trying to then apply it to some aspect of conservation planning. As you all know, these continuous sites, some of them can also kind of relay temperature data in real time. So that can be important for certain stakeholder communication. If you have lots of angler groups who want to know when and where to go fishing, they can use those data that you are hosting on your website. So there's different ways that we can use continuous data in both outreach and sort of science and policy. So again, you all probably know most of this, but there's quite a bit of variation in how much it costs to do continuous monitoring. It might range from $50 to $1,000+ per site, depending on the equipment that you're using and the capabilities of that equipment. This monitoring does require some moderate ability of kind of identifying and good field sites and deploying and maintaining that equipment. And also some moderate technical ability for actually launching, downloading, storing, and analyzing those data. So I just want to walk through the pictures on the right really quick. The first column of pictures, those are just examples of different sensor types, ranging from the I button in the top, the really tiny one, down to the kind of Hobo Pro V2s and pendants, which you all might be familiar with. In the middle of these sensors, have to actually go into the stream somehow. So there's a variety of ways that folks have creatively thought about anchoring these units into the stream, understanding the vagaries of flows and impacts of ice in the winter if you're keeping them for the long term. So you might just attach it to a concrete block, attach it to some rebar or steel pin like we do for the mayflies, or even bolt them into the rocks with some rock climbing equipment on the bottom. And finally, there's different ways that we can actually have to access these data. We can download them from sensors in different ways using, for example, shuttles in the top right, where you actually have to have your hands on the sensor. Or as you all know, for the mayflies, you can kind of semi-remotely access that data either online or by just going to this sort of the station where you're kind of collecting the data, but not actually having to get wet and get in the water. So I'd say for a really good overview of continuous monitoring data efforts and resources, I'd check out the 2 links in the bottom and also the EnviroDIY link, which I didn't include here. I forgot to, but there's a space for it. I think TE's resources are really great too, and so is Connecticut's. They have a big stream temperature volunteer monitoring program. So I think some of the limitations of continuous monitoring, for me, the biggest one is that it does require quite a bit of resources, and both in terms of time and cost. And those resources can limit how many sites we can monitor across space. And as I showed you earlier, can be significant variation in space, I think, which is really interesting to me and trout biologists. And so we are always interested in trying to scale up the number of sites we can monitor. So those resources is one limitation to be able to scale up the number of sites that we can hit. So with that in mind, one other approach that we can take is to do grab sampling. So this is a single snapshot measurement in time and space using a really simple thermometer. So for example, in the figure on the right, if you just went to the site at the sort of the black circles and you're just collecting one single measurement, that would be synonymous with taking one of these grab samples. You can see that one site visit might not have much context or meaning for thinking of trying to relate that back to the biology of organisms or our policy standards. But as you collect more and more samples through time, maybe you might start collecting some sort of average that might be more meaningful to wherever you're collecting those data. So maybe brook trout biology. Of course, as you go and collect more and more temperature data from a single point, there's probably trade-offs between just deploying a continuous monitor at that site versus having volunteers or staff continuing to go back to the same site over and over again. These grab samples do allow you to scale up significantly in space in terms of the number of sites you can sample, which I think is their large benefit. And they can be sampled very easily with very basic equipment and basic skills. It doesn't take it's not too difficult to process those data. So I think, although there are limitations in terms of what grab sample data can tell you, in terms of relating it back to time averaged policy or biology relevant metrics, what we can do is this synoptic or sampling, or essentially synchronized sampling across space, but in just one point in time. So it sounds like David has already talked about this sort of sampling approach with you all, but I just want to share one example that we've taken. This is in Lepacon Creek near Phillipsburg, New Jersey, where we had volunteers go out all the same date and time with just stream temperature thermometers. We all took in dips, at 4 p.m. and on August 22nd. And what that allows us to do is on the left, just simply map out spatial variation temperature at one point in time. And on the right, what we can then do is just kind of calculate some metric of warming rates between sites. And so really this provides, I think, a great first step in trying to translate some temperature data into potential impacts on those temperatures, that are occurring between our sampling sites. So for example, where we see a red dot, that means upstream there's been significant warming between the two sampling sites, and that might be because of lack riparian shade. And this section does happen to flow through multiple golf courses. Really interestingly, on the bottom of the figure, you can also see really dark blue dots on the right, and that's where we have significant cooling across short distances in space. And so what we found is there's actually a significant amount of groundwater that dumps into Lepacon Creek just outside and just through the town of Phillipsburg. So right before it gets to the Delaware River, it's actually at its coldest and hosting the highest densities of brown trout populations, wild brown trout populations. So I think this is a great kind of communications tool, and volunteers really enjoy it. And it's a quick way to translate temperature data into something that might be a bit meaningful in terms of where we want to prioritize our efforts or outreach for protection or restoration sort of activities. And just really quickly, I want to mention one last type of monitoring that actually attempts to integrate these two, this continuous monitoring and our grab samples. And so at TU in New Jersey, I had, I was collecting continuous monitoring at sites. So say example, the points in the black, but we also had a lot of volunteers who are out there on the ground collecting grab samples as well, those points in the gray. We're really interested in knowing whether we could kind of take sort of the best of both worlds and combine them into one type of data. So could we take the large scale of our grab sample sites, covering many different sites, with those time average metrics that are really important for us, that we can get from the continuous sites to relate back to our water quality standards and our brook trout and biological metrics. So really, I'm going to take a single slide to say that we did develop an approach that allows us to basically leverage our continuous temperature network, monitoring network, to actually predict time average metrics in places where we're just doing grab samples. So just single snapshot measurements in space and time. So if you want to read more about how we do this, I'd suggest clicking on the link to the bottom left. But essentially what we can do is just use a relationship between our instantaneous temperatures that our sensor network is collecting. It's the bottom right of that figure on the right. And we can relate that back to the long-term average conditions at those same continuous monitoring sites on the y-axis. And if we create these relationships for when we're actually doing grab sampling in other places, that allows us to use this relationship to actually estimate some time average metric in all those other places. So I think long story short here is this allows us to collect much more, significantly more data at more sites that's relevant to biology and relevant to policy in terms of our water quality standards, without significantly increasing our resource investment in continuous monitoring sites, and instead just using simple volunteer or staff grab samples. So I'll revisit this sort of towards the end of the talk. I just want to share an example that Stroud actually did help the Broadhead Watershed Association actually implement this method last summer in the Broadhead Watershed. So each of these bars is a stream site where volunteers from BWA took single grab samples, and they leveraged your sort of mayfly network, at least a local one, I think maybe 14 loggers or so, 15 loggers around the Broadhead Watershed to actually predict these long-term average conditions at these places where the volunteers were just taking grab samples. So you can see on the y-axis, this is the estimated July and August stream temperature at each of these different streams. And these bars are color-coded essentially by how well or how they relate to different important brook trout temperature metrics. So those ones in red are generally sites that are have surpassed certain thresholds for brook trout biology, whereas ones in green are still in a really good temperature range, great for growth for brook trout. And again, all these bars just had a single data point that was collected by BWA, but they're able to predict these long-term average summer conditions at these sites. This is pretty useful information for planning. Then finally, I just want to talk about a few applications of how I've actually used our stream temperature data in New Jersey. So first, I wanted to share sort of a vignette about our continuous temperature data. So there are many organizations in Northwest New Jersey that are collecting continuous temperature data, or were collecting when I was there. Altogether, we had about 260 stream temperature monitoring sites among us, but we really didn't have any way of sharing those data aside from, occasionally emailing one another to get data for a certain site. We all had different reasons for actually collecting, these data, whether they're temperature focused or just a general monitoring activity. And so we often didn't kind of aggregate all of our temperature data in one place, like you all do with the mayfly stations. So I wanted to advocate for is that, we decided to start sharing our data in ways that, might be useful to other temperature users, both our local partners, as well as folks that we don't even really know or think about on a daily basis. And I'll explain that in a second. So we chose this EcoSheds temperature database. And this is sort of a publicly available database where if you have stream temperature data, you can go and submit this to the USGS. And this serves as a great place to store, view, and download your own temperature data, but then also to access other folks' data who might be collecting it either locally in your area, or for scientists, they might be really interested in sort of in data collected at broader spatial scales. So these temperature data that we submit to the USGS actually informs broad scale analyses and models of things like the probability of brook trout occupancy now and into the future, not just at really broad scales, they also zoom down into your local watershed scales. So submitting your temperature data to these types of, this particular resource, actually provides and improves sort of local predictions for both stream temperatures and things like brook trout occupancy locally in your watersheds that you all care about. So it's just an example of sort of one of the models that's actually produced by this EcoSheds database if you submit your data to it. So the figure on the left basically shows northern New Jersey, and it shows for each of these small watersheds where we think brook trout currently have a high probability of existing in our streams and our watersheds in blue versus a lower probability in red. So these occupancy probability models are largely based on temperature, as I kind of showed earlier in that climate change figure. And this, I think, serves as a potentially good communications tool. Not only can you look at New Jersey as a whole, but on this website here at the bottom, you can zoom into your local watersheds and see, how the kind of occupancy probability for brook trout look in your area and your neighboring watersheds. And it could be a good communications tool potentially if you're talking with municipalities who might care about angling and sort of natural resources and aquatic life in local streams. And the figure on the right just shows and models if you increase air temperatures, how much the wild brook trout populations are expected to shrink in New Jersey in the coming years. So just one example of how submitting data that originally didn't intend to have sort of this communication purpose can actually inform models that others use for a variety of reasons. So what we also were able to do by actually sharing all of our temperature data collectively in one location was to inform our New Jersey DEP integrated water quality report. So every 2 years, DEP, just like every other state, has to report on their surface water quality. And so this figure in the middle showed what DEP thought of in terms of kind of the achievement of our watersheds stream temperature standards in 2020. So those in blue were watersheds they thought were actually achieving stream temperature standards. Those in pink were watersheds they thought weren't achieving those standards. So what we realized is that many of these catchments that were blue, we actually had data for monitoring data for those catchments from our partners or from TU. And when we analyzed those data, we got a very different story. We see that many more of those watersheds actually seem thermally impaired based on the data that we had available to us. So what we were able to do is to write a public comment to DEP requesting that actually use this EcoSheds database in their subsequent water quality reports in order to actually assess water quality conditions. And by doing so, in this most recent report, there's actually been an additional 20 watersheds identified as being impaired in the state, thermally impaired in the state, I'm sorry. Half of those were identified using the temperature data that we were able to submit collectively to the state through this, kind of data sharing portal. So again, this is most of our organizations didn't, have an original intention of submitting this data for kind of state water quality assessments, but by submitting data to this portal, we were able to use it for new reasons, that we didn't really anticipate, from our initial, the initial reasons why we deployed these monitors. So, identifying a stream as impaired is just the first step in a long line of then trying to get additional funding and resources to actually improve those impairments. But I think it's a great start, and it's allowing sort of a conversation to be formed with NJDEP about how stream temperature impairments are a pretty big issue in the state. So we'll continue to work with them. And finally, I just want to share sort of a vignette of how we're actually using that grab sample data that I mentioned earlier as well. So TU develops these conservation portfolios or plans at multiple spatial scales, from range-wide across the entire Northeast down to just our local watersheds in the far right. And these portfolios and plans are meant to identify places to protect and restore within watersheds. So locally, we use these plans to identify things like projects like culvert upgrades, dam removals, or repair and restoration and in-stream habitat improvements. But really all scales of these plans rely on temperature data because of its importance in relating back to brook trout biology. Wherever possible, we use stream temperature monitoring data, continuous data, to inform these plans. But as you all know, we can't collect temperature data everywhere, so we often use regional models to fill our data gaps. Unfortunately, what we see is that when we're not submitting local data to regional models, these regional models don't actually tell us much about what's going on locally. So on the bottom axis, you can see what each of these points is a place where we do have continuous temperature data monitoring. The bottom axis is what our regional models predict the temperatures at those sites should be, based on sort of not having any local information available to that model. And on the y-axis is what the actual conditions are at those sites. And the take home here is there's really no relationship between the two, which means that unless our regional models are getting some local information, they really aren't doing a great job right now of actually predicting stream temperatures on the ground. So that means that our plans and our portfolios that we're trying to develop with these regional models probably aren't super effective in helping us identify places to protect and restore. So, we were slated to develop some of these plans in some key New Jersey watersheds. We tried to use as much continuous monitoring data as possible. We had about 70 continuous sites among 4 different organizations to inform these plans. But there were many, many places in our watersheds where we wanted temperature data, but didn't really have it and had to rely on these regional temperature models. So in place of that, what we decided to try to do was to rely on those grab sampling approaches to kind of fill these gaps rather than use those regional models. So we had 25 volunteers go out. They collected 325 grab samples in places like upstream and downstream of dams, riparian canopy gaps, tributary pour points, and along our main stem rivers and streams. We ultimately took that integrated modeling approach that I presented earlier, which allows us to estimate what the long-term average conditions are at those 325 sites. And kind of develop time averaged brook trout biology relevant metrics at those grab sampled sites rather than just having that single point in time measurement. So we use those grab samples to then inform our conservation plans. So this is for a snapshot of the flat brook. This is sort of an ARC web map. You can explore it in the links at the bottom left and see how we actually use our temperature data from our volunteers to actually perform an ecological prioritization of all these different features on the left. So we prioritized which dams in this watershed were having largest thermal impacts and should be removed, which crossings, not just opened up the most upstream habitat, but also opened up the most cold upstream habitat, whereas we didn't really originally have that sort of data. We identified where we should be doing plantings in this watershed, as well as where there was already cold, good habitat conditions, where we could actually improve on those conditions through wood addition or other habitat improvement projects. So you can see the stream colors here on the map. Those are all just kind of estimated from all our volunteer efforts at the hundreds of sites in this watershed where they're able to collect temperature data.
About 5 minutes, Keith.
Okay.
Perfect timing.
So sorry it took too long there and had some technical difficulties earlier, but
All
I hope to
good, all
share
good.
at a high level, why we might want to monitor stream temps, a few of the ways that we're doing it, and some new ways, that integrated approach, as well as just some ways that we've actually applied our stream temperature data in New Jersey to some planning efforts. And with that, I'll take any questions. Again, I'm sorry, there's just 5 minutes left for discussion.
Yeah, I have a question on beavers. I had heard that the water coming out below a beaver dam is actually cooler than the pond or impounded water above it. Any comments on that, or how do you see beavers as affecting the stream temperatures?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And I think there hasn't been enough work done on that question. And I think it's sort of geographically dependent. So in the Northwest, there's been a few studies that show that beaver are actually cooling streams. So I think by tapping into the water table a bit better than other streams in those regions, those streams downstream of beaver dams actually do seem to cool a little bit with some hyperetic flows. What I have personally noticed through my monitoring in New Jersey, where we do have beaver dams, and even a little bit in Vermont, is that the results are mixed. And oftentimes I'd say that below beaver dams in New Jersey, streams are a bit warmer, somewhat just like they are for man-made impoundments. So I think there is some geographic dependency of the answer to that question. And I think in our region right now, I'm seeing a bit more warming than cooling. Beavers definitely have many other ecosystem benefits. But
my understanding just from base physics is the beaver dams, because they're sticks and most of the water outflow, rather than coming over like on a low-head dam, actually comes out underneath the dam. Therefore, it's pulling off lower water, which is cooler. That's my understanding of why the water should be theoretically cooler than the surface temperature.
Yeah.
Depends how they build the dam, I guess.
I think if you're getting more hyporheic flow under that dam face, that could be one way of cooling it slightly. And then I think in order to get like a thermal stratification effect in the pond, you'd have to have a pretty deep pond. But I'm sure it does happen in places. But yeah, I think that's a really important question and one that deserves more monitoring and more research.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I had a question regarding the EchoShed modeling. You showed some data for current brook trout occupancy and then something 2 years in the advance. Can that modeling be run backward, say a decade or so to, many anglers ask the question, why, don't we see as many trout in this area as I did, for example, 10 years ago? And in some ways, in dealing with municipalities, a longer stretch of time might be useful.
Yeah, I completely agree. And so I'd say that climate change figure I showed actually is using that EcoSheds model to hindcast those temperature data back into 1980. I think right now that data, the EcoSheds interface is really interesting. You can do lots of things and explore data there. But right now it's not easy to actually extract those like past decadal changes in temperature from their interface. I have suggested to them that might be interesting for the very reasons that you said. Like folks want to know what has happened through time already. And I think that might be a more powerful message for why we might want to do things now to maybe slow down those changes moving forward. So I hope that they start integrating or at least allowing users to access that data more readily than they currently do. I think you need some skills to get to that back end of that data set.
Keith, I have a question about your statement early on about the first stream or the major stream in New Jersey, I think it was, that reached 80 degrees average July temperature Fahrenheit in a dammed location. And because the water is stratified, temperature is stratified, what portion of the stream dammed water reached that 80 degrees, and how did it affect, if it was only part of the impounded water, how did it affect fish behavior? Was it a place for thermal refuge? Was it a place for foraging? I don't know what the quality of the ecosystem is for fish in that setting.
Yeah, so the 80 degrees I referenced was monitored, or that monitoring station was just downstream of the impoundment. So this is a smaller dam, maybe about 8 feet high or so. It's coming over the top, so it's not a bottom release dam or anything, which I think describes most of our dams in New Jersey are not hypolimnetic releases. So that water is coming all from the sort of the surface temperature of the impoundment. I think anecdotally do see that there are not really brook trout in that reach below the dam. And we increase in abundance as we get more like half a kilometer, and 2 kilometers downstream of that dam. We eventually start to pick up brook trout again. But we have a very different fish community, a warm water fish community that includes things like sunnies, even small bass in this really tiny stream, kind of just downstream of that impoundment. And just upstream of that impoundment, temperatures are actually, I'm trying to convert this in my head, but they're about 14 C mean July temperature. So I think that might be around 60 or so. I don't exactly know. So there's this huge upstream to downstream difference. And yeah, so does that answer your question somewhat?
Yes, it did help clarify the relevance of the measurements, and it's not just a matter of what's in the impounded area. But the other part of the question was about, I've just always wondered how fish can exploit impounded areas aside from the downstream or upstream flowing water, but because there are, I don't know, I know there's a lot of sediment that's collected in an impounded area. I just don't know whether it's a useful habitat for them or not.
Yeah, I think for certain species, it definitely can be. So first of all, your warm water species, they thrive in impoundments, and it's often one reason why folks don't want to remove them. But then in terms of our sort of lotic cold water species, like our stream dwelling cold water species like trout, you know, we might think, oh, impoundments are maybe never good. But there are plenty of studies that show that those can be seasonal resources at times. So if fish populations are above the dam, they can freely access that impoundment and then move back into their streams at certain times of year. They can potentially exploit, thermal resources and food webs that are more productive than their own streams at certain times of year.
Okay.
So that can happen. And I think it's just a matter of trading those potential benefits off against the downstream negative impacts of the impoundment on the downstream populations. I'd also say that's not, although that can theoretically happen and is shown to happen, I don't know if that's really the standard in a place like New Jersey, where our brook trout populations are pretty small and don't move quite as readily as some larger bodied populations do in other places. So brook trout in some places can move a lot, in other places are sort of home bodies, or we call them residents. So I'm not sure how much they exploit resources and impoundments in our area. I'd say, like, somewhat related to that question, that brook trout study that I showed you, we were doing the flat brook right now. That's actually asking a similar question. We're wondering if those brook trout populations in those cold water springs I showed you, we're wondering if they ever have a reason to actually move out into the main stem flat brook, where those temperatures are warmer in the summer and potentially lethal at certain times in the summer. But maybe in our shoulder seasons like spring and fall might provide some good productive habitat that's cool enough, but also has a lot of bugs to support their kind of feeding rates. So we're monitoring those temps to see when certain habitats switch from most productive to least productive, and vice versa.
Wow.
Just related to that question you
Very,
asked.
very complex, very interesting. And so, because my understanding is that fish movement spatially throughout their stream network is also related to the amount of genetic mixing, right? The amount of genetic diversity. And so does that mean that is that yet another reason? I mean, you've just mentioned many reasons that might limit the number of fish that can survive in a certain area in relation to temperature, but does the lack of connectivity in resident fish, does that diminish their population numbers?
Yeah, it's also a good question. And I think in theory, yes. But I believe for brook trout populations in particular, I think we've had a hard time finding the data to show that sort of these small, genetically isolated populations, also the isolation itself is impacting their population size just through like a genetic effect. There might be an impact that these fish are isolated into small habitats. They have smaller population sizes because of that. And by having a smaller population size, just by luck and chance, you have more of a chance of going extinct, when you only have 20 fish in your population versus 500. So there is that sort of stochastic effect of small population sizes and going extinct. We also see that they definitely have reduced genetic diversity if they're isolated in small populations. But I think it's just hard to actually connect the reduced genetic diversity directly to reduced abundances. There's other reasons why genetic diversity is important in terms of maybe being able to adapt to future conditions. So I guess the answer for you is theoretically yes in population genetics, but we just don't have the data to really prove that yet, I guess.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thanks for reviewing our the documents also our temperature document. Thank you for reviewing that.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, it's great.
All right, I'm going to stop recording right now. Next meeting is May 16th, I believe. Yes, May 16th. So we'll see everyone then. I'm going to stop recording and we can continue with any further questions.